Welcome everyone to Home Choir's Deep Dive, and this is the 7th in an 8-part series which I've been calling Exploring the Great Works. And the thing is, today it's not so much exploring the great works as exploring the life of a great composer, Christoph Gluck, whose influence was absolutely huge on so many composers, and yet he is considered to be a B-list, even a C-list sort of composer, mentioned in dispatches, but not necessarily known, apart from those of you who know his great opera Orfeo et Eurydice, which we're going to be talking about this afternoon. So there's his signature, there's a little bit of his music. Let's find out a little bit more about him. So, Herr Gluck, would you sign in, please? There he is. This is Christoph Gluck, and he was a Bohemian Austrian composer of Italian and French opera. That's what he's known for. A leading figure, really, in the development of opera in the late 18th century. And in particular, his contribution to music is that he pretty much single-handedly set out this sort of series of ways in which opera could develop from the rather stodgy Baroque styles of opera seria, which we've discussed here on the channel. Obviously, Pergolesi introduced this idea of opera buffa, the comic operas, but even that, couldn't do enough to change Baroque opera. It was a very stodgy style by the time Herr Gluck wrote his treatise in the 1760s. It had been around for 160 years. It had basically stagnated, and people were fed up with it, as Handel discovered in the 1740s. So Gluck was very important for that. He was also, I'm glad to say, a composer who lived a long and happy life, relatively speaking. He was immensely well travelled. As we'll discover, he lived in Prague, he lived in Milan, he lived in Paris, in London, and before settling in Vienna. So he really did travel the world and picked up a lot of important cultural and artistic aspects to his compositions by doing so. So here's a little bit of a summary. I had someone say to me, all pictures is great, but can we have a little bit of text to kind of write down later on? So if you want to take notes, there you are, everyone. So his date, 1714, 1787, makes a change to be talking about a composer who made it out of his 30s. He was a very widely travelled cosmopolitan composer, as I've said. He broke the stranglehold of opera seria, transformed it into the more recognisable classical forms. He wrote very little choral music, at least that which survives. A lot of his work, very sadly, was lost in a fire in 1805. But the De Profundis, as we've just discovered, was a very beautiful and very influential piece written in the last year of his life. And he was a contemporary of Handel. He met Handel, worked with him, Haydn and Mozart, of course. So let's start at the beginning, a very good place to start. He was born in 1714, at least as far as we can tell. There are no baptismal records that we can find, but he himself wrote that he was born in 1714, and who are we to argue with the man himself? He was baptized Christophorus Willibaldus Gluck, great name, on the 4th of July in 1714, as we say, according to himself, in the village of Weidenwang, which is a parish that at the time also included Erasbach. So this is in Bohemia. Now, Gluck himself, this is the interesting thing. I've mentioned this before, the name Willibald. Now, I've taught about Gluck in classes here in the UK, and there's always a bit of a snigger, a bit of a titter at the name Willibald. Now, he himself never, ever used the name. It was given to him later on by scholars. Now, the reason that he had the name is that everyone in the town was given this name Willibald. It's frequently found, in fact, in the baptismal register of Weidenfang, because the saint of the area was consecrated to Saint Willibald, the patron saint of children who are bullied for having silly names. Now, no documents contemporary with Gluck's life ever used the name Willibald. So why do we call him Christoph Willibald Gluck? Well, his uncle, his father's youngest brother, was also Christoph Gluck. He was born in 1700, and quite a few scholars in the 19th century found this name. So, well, he must have been born in 1700, and therefore he lived to, a ripe old age. No. His uncle, who's only 14 years older than him, was also Christoph Gluck. And so in order to differentiate him, they found that he had been baptized with this middle name, and they called him Christoph Willibald Gluck to make sure that he was differentiated from his uncle. So there we are. A little bit of a historical fact. And just to say, it's not entirely unusual to have an uncle who's only 14 years older than you. My Uncle Chris is only 14 years older than me. When he used to babysit us when I was 5, so he was 19, he taught me the essential art of eating cereal out of a mug. Valuable life skills, ladies and gentlemen. So back to Christoph Gluck. He was, as all these great composers are, interested in music from an early age, playing the violin, playing the cello, and singing. Now, his father was not a musician, and his father really didn't like the idea of his son becoming a musician. His father worked on the land. His father was a forester, and to avoid a life of working in the forests and a hard, really quite dangerous life, Gluck ran away at the age of 13 to Prague, where he became involved in music making in the Bohemian capital. He was a largely self-taught composer. So unlike a lot of these musicians that we've been looking at in the recent years, in recent weeks, he didn't study with the greats. He taught himself. And I, speaking as a self-taught pianist and largely self-taught conductor, I can really empathize with that. You know, the passion to drive yourself forward and learn something without guidance, really, it forces you to look at it in a different way. Berlioz was another one, self-taught. He was very much influenced by this marvelous building here, the Prague Opera House. And there he heard operas by Vivaldi and by Albinoni put on in this wonderful, wonderful building. And he really soaked up the style there in Prague. If you've ever been to Prague, of course, the Prague Opera House is where they filmed a lot of Amadeus. It's also where Don Giovanni was premiered, Mozart's incredible opera. Now, he spent 2 years as a chamber musician to Prince Lobkowitz, who was a notable patron of musicians when he returned to Vienna. And in 1737, Gluck arrived in Milan, where he met this chap here, Giovanni Battista Sammartini, who was a very important composer and actually took Gluck under his wing and gave him some much needed instruction, in particular, the practical knowledge of all the instruments. So Sammartini was a composer, but he didn't write opera. He mainly wrote sacred music and symphonies. And so Gluck was massively inspired by listening to opera, but got an instrumental background from somebody who was an innovator in symphonic style. So the symphony was still a very new idea there. The using instruments in families was still a new innovation. So Gluck really is a bridge composer. We see them all throughout history. He was neither Baroque nor classical. He had the Baroque operatic style, very much influenced, as I say, by Vivaldi, by Albinoni, but he had this new way of writing for instruments, which he picked up from Sammartini. And so he formed an association, Gluck this is, with the up-and-coming opera houses in Milan, and ended up writing Italian opera, which was obviously a huge, huge boon for him. And he composed operas for each of the next 4 carnivals in 1737, 8, 9, and 40 in Milan. He also wrote operas for many of the other cities in northern Italy, including Turin and Venice. So, you know, from an early start, with very little musical instruction, he found himself composing operas in Italy for the Italians and doing very well. There is a bust of Gluck, and if you notice, he has a heavily pockmarked face. This is something that we know about him. He probably suffered from smallpox as a child. Okay, everyone, how are we doing? Excellent. Good. Self-taught pianist. Yes, thank you. Yes. That's why if you ever ask me to play a scale, it's hopeless. Now, you might recognize this chap here. Those of you who are fans of SIC and even of this channel, this is Herr Handel. And of course, Gluck made it across to London. 1745, he accepted an invitation from Lord Middlesex. We've heard of him before because he was also a supporter of Handel, to become the house composer at the King's Theatre. And he travelled to England via Frankfurt. Now, the timing was rather poor. The Jacobite rebellion had caused much panic in London, and for most of the year the theatre was closed. So having arrived in London with the thought of having this job in the theatre, suddenly the theatres were closed. Imagine that. Hoping to put on something, suddenly all the theatres being closed. A strange situation. So he worked and produced some trio sonatas, some instrumental music, just to keep his hand in. However, when the theatres reopened, he found himself writing operas in the Italian style. Now, remember, from those of you that know about Handel and about Messiah, the appetite for Italian opera was very much waning, sadly, in the 1740s. People had kind of had enough. And composers like Handel had done very, very well writing Italian opera, but things were really starting to stagnate. Now, Handel really, in typical form, met Gluck, worked with him, and Gluck was the younger man by far. And Gluck really worshipped Handel. He said he was the greatest composer of our times, writing in the greatest musical style. Handel, however, according to Charles Burney, who was a very well-travelled chap and met a lot of these composers, Handel said he knows no more of counterpoint than mein Cook waltz. So basically, he wasn't a fan of Gluck's counterpoint. Bear in mind, Gluck had had no formal training, whereas Handel, of course, had had an opportunity to study with the greats. So it didn't stop them performing together. They gave a very successful concert in the Haymarket Theatre, with Handel playing an organ concerto and Gluck playing on the glass organ, the glass harmonica, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous instrument. If you've not heard it, after this broadcast, Google glass harmonica and have a little listen. It's a beautiful, beautiful instrument. Really ethereal sound. In fact, Saint-Saëns wrote for the glass harmonica in the aquarium in Carnival of the Animals. And actually, there's a little story very quickly. I will see if I can find the link and tweet it out. There is a version of Carnival of the Animals where they booked the wrong kind of harmonica player. They're supposed to book this lovely glass harmonica, which was supposed to rub and get these lovely sounds from. They booked a harmonica player instead, and he very gamely had a go at it. I'll see if I can find the version of it out there and I'll tweet it out. Anyway, as I say, despite Handel being rude about him, Gluck was a huge admirer of Handel. There's the man himself in an engraving from 1750 or so. Now, between 1746 and 1761, Gluck led the life of a travelling musician. He travelled widely across Europe, performing and writing operas. And in around 1752, he largely settled in Vienna, though he did venture out to Paris and so on. And he stayed there for the remainder of his life. He met his wife, who was a very influential daughter of a nobleman, and he had obtained several significant appointments through his wife's influence. Now, we get to an important point here, and I've left this blank because I'm going to bring in the various aspects of this next point. In the early 1760s, Gluck realised, bear in mind, Handel had died, Italian opera was very much on the wane, and it became very clear that opera was stale and needed to be updated. And Gluck wrote a series of points at the start of one of his operas, almost a treatise really, of how opera needed to change. And he said that, he thought that the main Italian operatic genres, that is, say, opera seria, I'm going to go back to the picture here so we can have something to look at. Opera seria had become really threadbare. Opera buffa, the comic opera, which Pergolesi had pretty much introduced, its jokes had become really very, very stale indeed. And so he said that what we need is to return opera to its origins, to focus on human drama and passion and making words and music of equal importance. So no more da capo arias, no more going back to the beginning and singing all the way through. No opportunity for vocal improvisation. Bear in mind that Baroque opera is full of, opportunities for singers to show off. No more of that. No long melismas, no long phrases with lots and lots of notes. Syllabic setting of the text so you could understand what people were singing. Far less repetition of text within an aria. So this is all about simplification and getting rid of all of this sort of very Baroque frippery, if you like. A blurring of the distinction between recitative and aria. So no more sort of the, if you know your Baroque, very far less of the 5-1 and the sense of, right, well, this is the recitative and now here's the aria. Much, much more of singing and much less recitative. Accompanied rather than secco recitative. So secco recitative is this, where you have the harpsichord, as in dry, secco as in dry, accompanied as in with the orchestra playing. So these are all sort of baby steps, but they're all so important. Simpler, more flowing melodic lines. And all of these were brought in to make the idea of opera much more palatable, much more entertaining, and much less boring. And overall, the idea of the overture being kind of just a piece of music that introduced the opera, well, no, now it's part of the drama. And this is where things got really interesting, folks. This is where he introduced his new style. So 1760, he wrote Don Juan, which was his first attempt at this new style. But it wasn't until 1762 with Orfeo et Eurydice that he really launched this new style. And it was an immense success, at least in Vienna. He tried to take this wonderful opera to Paris and it fell flat on its face. He had to rewrite it. But when he brought it back, it was absolutely wonderful. He tried to achieve in the composition of this wonderful opera a neoclassical or beautiful simplicity, which if you listen to it, and I really can't recommend it enough to you, ladies and gentlemen, it is a wonderful opera. It's still very much, it's never left the repertoire, you know, in 250 years. Opera companies are still performing it, they still love it. His idea was to make the drama of the work more important than the people playing the part. And bearing in mind that Baroque opera had become all about the stars and their particular aspects and their vocal gymnastics, if you like, it would require no big names to sing it. It was all about the drama, everyone. So quickly, before we listen to a little bit of it, in 1771, bearing in mind that he was fairly venerable by this point, Gluck was visited by Charles Burney, who we've already discussed, and he interviewed him, basically. And Gluck said this about this operatic style: "It was my intention to confine music to its true dramatic province of assisting poetical expression, and of augmenting the interest of the fable without interrupting the action or chilling it with useless and superfluous ornaments," all of those trills and fast running, completely useless. "For the office of music, when joined to poetry, seemed to me to resemble that of colouring in a correct and well-disposed design, where the lights and shades seem only to animate the figures without altering the outline." I love that. Animating the figures without altering the outline. So the music serves the drama and the drama serves the music. It had become far too stale, far too much about show off singers singing these fast lines, and we'd lost the drama. So Gluck brought it back. There we are, everyone. So what I'm going to do is now I'm just going to play you a couple of tiny little extracts from Orfeo and Eurydice. And I really, as I say, I can't recommend this enough. Let me just find the point. So bear with me a second. I'm just going to bring this out here. So this, first of all, here is a lovely little aria. Just going to play the start of it. Sung to Orpheus as he is grieving for the loss of Eurydice. And he goes through, in the first act, he goes through, as all Orpheuses do, in the various settings of it. Obviously, he loses his beautiful wife, and goes through an intense period of grieving, and this is where one of the courtiers sings to him, "Well, if you love her, go after her," effectively. So this is the end of the little recitative, and it's accompanied. So far it still sounds quite Baroque, but listen. So within those few bars, you have two different time signatures, but you have a very, very singable melody, no fast melismas, lovely little tune, very bright and lively. It's designed to get him to cheer up and go on out and seek her. And there's that lovely little note with the oboe just holds the note all the way through, very symphonic, very much about the music guiding the drama there. And I'm going to just skip on a little bit, folks. At the end of the first act, Orpheus is setting out into the underworld. And I'm just going to skip ahead. And what Gluck writes here is an extended little orchestral moment, which leads into the start of Act 2, which is one of the dances of the Furies. And do look up Gluck's Dance of the Furies, a fantastic piece. And here you really start to see the programmatic elements coming back in. We've spoken about those before, where the music takes on the dramatic characteristics of what's going on. So if it's a bright summer's day, it might sound happy and major. And if it's something dark and brooding, or use a minor key and low pitches, well, here he's setting out into the underworld. So have a listen to this. And bearing in mind, Gluck was taught by Sammartini all of these instrumental techniques, but he's brought this idea of the drama into opera very deliberately. Here we go. Sound like a storm? Sounded like a storm to me. Obviously, they had thunderboards there going on, but all of those really dramatic sounds in the orchestra. And someone said it sounds like Handel, but it's like Handel plus, isn't it? It's not. It's more than Handel ever wrote. Handel was a great dramatist, but Gluck is taking it one step further, taking out the Baroque aspects and bringing in these more human emotions, breaking the chains that Handel had to drag behind him and setting out in a new direction, a bit like Orpheus. So the start of Act 2 has one of the dances of the Furies. Here we go. Use of brass, these horns. This is all very classical, all very unusual, certainly in the world of opera. Glennis has said this could have been performed in York this afternoon with the thunder. Absolutely. So what I love about that is you can so clearly visualize just from the sound of the music. You can hear a storm, you can hear this stern procession. And then, so ladies and gentlemen, I'm aware time is already running out, but I want to just finish by talking just a little bit about De Profundis. And of course, the whole point of talking about Orfeo and Eurydice is to say that this opera had an enormous effect, a seismic effect on the world of opera. It basically opened the floodgates for an entirely new style of composing in this form. And of course, the young Mozart heard and loved this opera, and when you listen to his early operas, particularly Don Giovanni, particularly Clemenzo di Tito, and these earlier works, you can hear the influence of Gluck. There's still recitative, there's still a continuo of sorts, but it is much more in the service of drama. And whenever you hear Baroque aspects in these Mozartian operas, when you hear fast melismas, in Don Giovanni, for example, when Donna Elvira starts ranting on about how badly Don Giovanni has treated her, she sings a very melismatic line because she's very much a very emotional character, and it's used in a very particular way. But the vast majority of Don Giovanni is in this Gluckian style, if you like. Even the Commendatore, when he sings Don Giovanni a cena teco, his line is very, very, very stodgy and can't move because he himself is made of stone. So all of this idea of the music serving the drama and the drama serving the music, it's down to Gluck. So very, very quickly, just to bring us full circle here, let's talk briefly about De Profundis, which I've already said was written in the final year of his life, 1787. As far as we know, he never actually heard it performed. He died of a heart attack. And the legend is, I haven't been able to confirm or deny this, but the legend is he was suffering from some digestive problems and was told to not drink alcohol. And after a particularly successful performance, he drank a lot of liqueur, which brought on this unfortunate heart attack. He seems to have had a couple of funny turns beforehand, possibly a stroke. So it probably wasn't the best idea. I don't know whether it's entirely true, but it certainly popped up in a couple of bits of my research. So we don't think he ever actually got to hear this beautiful De Profundis performed. It was written with full orchestral accompaniment, and you can hear versions of it on the internet if you search for it. But the version that's often most commonly performed today is the a cappella version, which we learned about half an hour ago here on Home Choir. And it's probably due, as I said, because the first performance of it was a cappella, and it was performed at Gluck's funeral, where his friend Salieri was conducting. Now, the motet itself is astonishingly different to the majority of his operatic writing. It's basically syllabic. It's chordal, like so many of the sort of pagan hymns in operas, but it's different because of the emotional states experienced in this one single movement. And so you get this journey from the beginning, from the deep. We rise and then we fall back down again. We have fugal entries, which would have been completely out of place in an opera. What's interesting is that it's very Mozartian. There's a lot of evidence we can say that Mozart would have heard this, and that it influenced his later works, in particular his Requiem, which is in D minor, like the De Profundis. So everyone, I just want to thank you for your time today. As always, I wish I could witter on for another half hour, but I would really urge you to seek out Orfeo at Eurydice. See if you can find Eurydice. Orpheus had a good look for her. Found her briefly. That's Schubert's choral work. That's the wrong slide, England. Goodness me. Let's go for the proper slide, shall we? So we finish the proper way. Goodness me. So do seek out the works of Christoph Gluck. He was a really, really influential, important composer. His opera writing is superb. This De Profundis, which we learnt today on the channel, is gorgeous. And we'll sing it, of course, on Sunday on our Sacred Sing. But if you get the chance, when you go back to your face-to-face choirs, those of you that are going back, do recommend it to your conductors, because it's not often performed and is a lovely, lovely work. Sits beautifully in a concert of music by Mozart and Beethoven, and Handel, of course, because Gluck was this bridge between the Baroque and the classical eras. So everyone, thank you for your time this afternoon. I do hope you've enjoyed it. Next week on Deep Dive, as I say, we're going to be looking at the work of Antonio Salieri. Maybe his music isn't as inspirational as that of Mozart, but he himself was a huge inspiration on so many composers. I feel it's only right to set the record straight and to hopefully stop him spinning in his grave quite so much. So all I'll say is, don't believe everything you hear in the film Amadeus. So thanks, everyone. I'll see you very soon. If you're off to sing with Nigel Short, well, enjoy. Send him my very best. And I'll see you on Friday for Fun Friday. Bye-bye, folks.